Oh, there we go.
All right. Hey, guys. It's Tim Moen here, leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada. Today, I'm joined with Victor Pross, the anarchist artist. And man, I got a little bit of Pepe the Frog in my throat or something going on there. And then I've got Bennett Hunter, the Canadian Libertarian. And I'm picking up a bunch of feedback in my...
I don't hear anything, but...
Me neither.
If it's annoying to you.
Do you have headphones in?
Never mind. There we go.
No,
I had YouTube open at the same time. Sorry, folks. A little technical difficulty there. All right, let's dive right into this, gentlemen. I want to hear your guys' thoughts. I'm still kind of formulating mine here. I've heard I've got serious concerns about this UN migration compact, which apparently is a legally non-binding agreement, essentially a giant virtue signal. But if it's just a virtue signal, guys, then why is this a big deal? And why are they signing this? Why are they even doing anything? I mean, can't they just post on social media about how compassionate and caring they are with our money and our sovereignty? Victor, why don't you start out? What are your issues with this?
Yeah, okay. Well, basically, the UN Pact, basically, as somebody kind of paraphrased it to kind of like break it down to its essential components, renamed it and called it "to dump millions of third world culturally incompatible state-dependent leeches into your neighborhood on your dime." Basically would be my would also be my summation of it. So and indeed, like Canada has signed the UN Global Migration Pact. Justin Trudeau, which apparently took place yesterday. It hasn't been, as we were discussing, gents, like we didn't see anything in the mainstream media, but I guess it's a done deal. And one of the component parts of that I understand of it, that it will be calling for the re-educating rather, and the sensitizing of the media on immigration issues. And you can see that this is not like a standalone thing. I think I can draw back a couple of months ago, or 3-4 months ago, something like that. And this migration pact signing comes shortly after Justin Trudeau announced a government plan that would decide which media outlets get a piece of the 595 million slush fund, if you remember that. Maybe some people in the audience do. So there's a manipulation and controlling of the media, of the information that's going to be dispersed in regards to this. So, and that's how the wording is phrased too, re-educating and sensitizing the media on immigration issues. So the political correctness comes into the fore of this. And the danger, I think, of the global compact for migration is not just that it will enable some clandestine international bureaucracy or judiciary to dictate to the UN, to dictate immigration policy over the objections of sovereign states, quote unquote. And this will also enable the progressives and all the socialists, communist factions within government, and to fatten their voter base, which is already academic, which has been done, taking the Democrats in the United States. I guess that can also speak abode for Europe, in Europe too, in certain countries. And it was and get this, it was the progressives who drafted the compact. The progressives, the socialists. It is a government. And not only is it like a government program, but it's not even on the right or the conservatives or the Republicans. It's the progressives. Never mind the Democrats. The progressives who drafted this compact, who assert that most terrorism concerns are anti-Muslim prejudice, and so it's bigoted to even suggest that there's a security problem. But I think that wiser, more objective and rational and a brave outlook would show us that something is amiss here, something is wrong.
Yeah, so if I hear you right, the word re-educate brings back ideas about, maybe camps or something like that, where we can send the media to make sure they're not spreading fake news. Bennett, what are your thoughts on this whole compact? Victor's concerned about the media ramifications. He's concerned about the people that have drafted it being ideologically possessed socialists and that sort of thing. What are your concerns with this compact?
Well, actually, I agree with quite a bit of what Victor is saying, but I will point out right here now, and we can cover all the different particulars of this particular topic. But the first thing I want to reference first and foremost is whether it was progressives that initiated, don't make any mistakes and don't kid yourself, Victor. There's plenty of people that want to identify themselves as conservatives, right? That they'd be completely on board. You got to remember, think about the mentality or the kind of psychology or the kind of people that like to identify as conservatives. And you got to admit that a lot of these people are on corporate boards, right? Business executives and the people that are the movers and shakers in the corporate entities that basically run Canada. And you can rest assured that a lot of them are going to vote for Conservative and Andrew Scheer, and they're completely on board with keeping wages stagnated and having a mass influx of cheap labor. Don't kid yourself for a minute that this isn't like this is the part actually I want to point out first and foremost. This isn't a left-right thing, folks. This is about they're going to replace you. If you're unwilling to conform to the political edicts of your political masters, right, whether they come from the left or the right, your authoritarian mommy or your authoritarian daddy, they're all going to tell you that if you don't get on board with what they want to, just like when you were a kid, right? And a lot of these people are these boomers, all right? And they're going to tell you, if you don't get on board with what they want, then you're going to be placed at the back of the bus and they'll just replace you. And that's what they're saying. Now, they'll come up with lots of nice language, rest assured. Now, that'll be the left, because the left, they're the ones that are great at manipulating the language, but the conservatives will fall in line. They'll just repeat and regurgitate the same basic talking points and rhetoric, but just with a little bit of their own particular spin. So, no, don't think that this is a left-only thing, because there's, like I say, I've even talked to, and because I do work in construction trades, and I'm not shy to talk to anybody. They're my bosses or executives in any place that I've ever worked in. Yeah, they kind of like the concept of, as long as it's competent. Now they will reject it if they're biased in one way, if they want competent labor, but if they can get at least quasi-competent labor at really, really cheap prices, they don't give a shit if you're Canadian. They don't care. They just want someone to provide, right? Which under a normal, like a typical free market scenario, that sounds like a good theory, but we don't all function under what people would suggest as a free market. Go to China, go to Indonesia, go to all the places around the world, you'll find out, yeah, there's things like, we're not all functioning on equal grounds here, folks. Now, I'm all for functioning like equal opportunity, equal starting point, but we're not all starting from the same point here. So you can't even pretend that this is even anything remotely resembling that we're just trying to give everybody a chance. No, they're basically trying to, like I said, they screwed up in the past, and I've even heard them say it. Oh, the demographics are terrible because the boomers were, 5 or 6 in comparison to us from Gen X or whatever that are maybe 1 or 2. The demographics are so messed up that we can't make up for all the entitlements that they've built up in this established corrupt system. And because we're not enough, there's not enough to replace them. And then combine even with the millennials, even with 2 generations, well, let's just say some people in certain generations might not even want to work to provide. So they're saying, well, we screwed over our kids. The grandkids don't seem like they're going to be able to do it. So, well, let's just get some foreigners. They'll do it, and they'll be appreciative because we brought them to our country. Let's be honest here. Don't try to make this into anything other than the fact that these are human beings that are looking for their own best interest, which we all do. The difference is you and I and Tim, we don't have the controls and mechanisms of government to pick winners or losers, whereas they do. But I just wanted to, before I continue on, and I won't occupy too much of the time here, but forget about what I'm saying. If you want to know what these people actually stand for, listen to their own rhetoric. And I'm going to play out, hopefully you can hear this. I'm going to play a short little clip. This is from the United Nations' own YouTube channel. And I listened to this piece of crap thing that was over an hour long just so that I could be properly informed and show you what these people are talking about. They suggest that this isn't a binding agreement. Well, listen to this, folks.
Congress would allow the United Nations to impose migration policies on member states,
louder,
on their sovereignty. False. the compact is not a treaty. Moreover, it is not legally binding. It is a framework for international cooperation, rooted in an intergovernmental process of negotiation in good faith that specifically reaffirms the principle of state sovereignty, including, and I quote, the sovereign rights of states to determine their national migration policy and their prerogative to govern migration within their jurisdiction in conformity with international law. End of quote.
In conformity with international law. You heard it from these are the people right down there today that are talking about implementing these central planners. Oh, it's non-binding, they suggest, but it has to be binding to international law. So how does that not? It sounds very much like it's a binding agreement as far as I'm concerned. Like I say, you don't have to listen to what I'm saying, folks. This is what the man down here that's talking about implementing this, that's from his own mouth. It has to comply with international law. So basically, does that not sound like they're wanting to circumvent domestic laws? Because think about what does international law? Female genital mutilation. There's lots of things under international law, or a lot of countries around the world that do things that are really, really in contrast to people in Western societies have become accustomed to as far as what we understand is in regards to freedoms post-Enlightenment era. So when you talk about international law, what the hell does that even mean, international law? You're talking about 190 some countries. Some countries are pure dictatorships, pure authoritarian regimes that don't give a flying rat's ass about human rights, but we're supposed to function under international law? No, I didn't never sign up. Victor, I know, didn't sign up. Tim never signed up. I don't think any Canadian ever signed up that we're supposed to conform to international law or norms when they decide that they can just send as many people as they want our way, and we're supposed to just bend over and take it. And that's the other thing. We have forced income and wealth redistribution regimes in this modern world. When they talk about, migration is a normal thing throughout all of human history. Throughout all of human history, up until the very last portion of where we live today in the last, 70 years, there was no such thing as a forced income or wealth redistributive state that was implemented in democracies. So, of course, it was okay to have a little bit of a free movement, right? A little bit to have some free market when you had actual, restrictions on what these central planners could do to domestic populations. Now they're saying that, no, everything's up in the air and open to whatever they say. So I say reject even the very premise of some asshole at the United Nations telling us as Canadians that we have to conform to what they say. No, hell no. That's my thoughts, in case you guys wanted to know.
I like it. Bennett's getting passionate here. I like to see that.
Man.
Well, I'll give you my thoughts here, and I'll take it at face value that it is what they say it is, which is a non-binding, non-legal a compact or agreement, which raises the question about why do it anyways. They could put it in the same category maybe as M103. You guys might remember that as the anti-Islamophobia motion in Parliament, which again is not law or legislation in and of itself, but it sets the groundwork and the framework. It sets together a committee that is supposed to look at a whole of government approach to tackling the problem of hate. And so we can expect, obviously, thoughts to be policed because of that motion eventually. So it lays the groundwork. So I think this is laying the groundwork for what will become law. And you're right. I think it will supersede our sovereignty to globalists, essentially, right? And I'm not a big fan of nationalists either. I don't like this portrayal of nationalists as antithetical to globalists. They're not opposites. They're basically the same. I have the same problem with nationalists as I do with globalists. They're generally just giant statists who want to undermine individual sovereignty for some nebulous collective and the greater good. But the main problem I have with this UN compact is that it represents a commitment to massively expand the welfare state. And we're expanding it not just to Canadians, but we're expanding it now to anyone who is migrating, right? And so in the compact, it talks about all the basic human rights of people, and they're not talking about the basic human rights that you, Victor, and you, Bennett, and myself would think of as basic human rights, which is leave me the hell alone. Negative rights, right, which is you're allowed to swing your fist short of my finger. They're talking about positive human rights. In other words, the right to healthcare, the right to food, the right to shelter, the right to education, the right to a basic income. All these things that require the infringement of someone else's rights in order to fulfill. Because if you have the right to healthcare, that means I'm obliged to pay for your healthcare. And so they're extending these human rights to people that are not our citizens. And so that is a massive expansion of the welfare state. And so this isn't about free flow of people. This is about massively increasing power, massively increasing the state, and keeping government shielded from the people. It's no longer the citizens that it's held accountable to. It's the elite, maybe multinational corporations or something like that benefit from the free flow. And Bennett, you mentioned, you talked about labor. Now, I typically don't mind free flow of labor if everyone's playing by the same rules and we're all operating in a market with access to law. But you might remember the foreign worker program that Canada had, where foreign workers could be sponsored to come over and work for. Now that sounds like a great idea. You know, generally speaking, it's not jobs that drive an economy, it's production. It's not, you know, just because wages drop isn't necessarily a bad thing. If we can produce things for cheaper, that increases our buying power, raises all boats, that sort of thing. So that's not necessarily bad. But what you had in the temporary foreign worker program was people coming to Canada being sponsored. And I heard this story that highlights the problem with it. Someone came over from the Philippines, I believe. They worked at a shopping mall kiosk for the owner of a business. Now, the owner of this business, every time that employee would go on his phone, would dock $100 from the guy's pay. Anytime he did some minor infraction at work, he would dock $100 from his pay. Part of the agreement was that this employee, this temporary foreign worker, also got room and board at the employer's house, and that was docked from his pay. So by the end of it, this employee took home next to nothing at the end of the month, because all the money was going back to the employer. So they were essentially indentured servants or slaves. So the guy had two choices. He could stay an indentured servant and live in Canada, or he could go back to live in squalor and be begging for food in the Philippines. So obviously that puts these migrants in a totally different category than regular Canadians. And how do you compete against indentured servants? You can't. So, you know, it's not clear what the negative unintended consequences of this will be. But to me, the biggest problem with it is that it represents a massive commitment to increase welfare, increase the burden on taxpayers, and create chaos, essentially.
Yeah, just to dovetail on that, Tim, you might have heard yourself, like on social media or just in your personal life, people arguing and debating this very subject. And there's an ongoing debate about how much mass migration costs. Like the open border lobby claims that all migrants are a net economic boom. And or they might say migrants are interchangeable with immigrants, that the immigrants are an economic boom, but they're using the word immigrant or migrant as like with a very broad brush.
Very broad.
Yeah, it's not like in with the founding of the United States, and then in the turn of the century of the 20th century, and throughout the 20s and the 30s, what have you, prior to the welfare state, you had a lot of people coming from Europe, who English-speaking people or people who were adapt to learn English and had a work ethic. They're coming from Europe. It's a different it's compatible, but a very different culture as well. They came to the United States. They state their claims. They just wanted to raise a family. They just wanted a better life. They had a very strong work ethic. Indeed, if they did make such a trek and they weren't going to the United States for any free goodies that weren't there, they were going there to work. And so you take that, and then you take like third world migrants with collectivist ideologies, like right up the keister of their whole psychology and their whole philosophy, and people who are illiterate even in their own language. Then we're not getting the best. They're importing the worst of the worst. So there's these two states of, you just can't paint this broad brushstroke, immigrant, you know. And for anyone who has any doubt about the costs associated with unchecked mass migration, Europe provides an instructive case study. The migrant crisis that began in 2015, thereabouts, 2014 to 2015, has resulted in a sudden mass infusion of at least 1.2 million individuals into European countries. And as reported by the Gate Institute, the Gatestone Institute, the recent, and people can look this up themselves, the recent record arrival of Europe, of hordes of Middle Eastern migrants, it is, as a matter of fact, we don't have to wait for the future. We know now, we can know now, is straining the national treasuries to the breaking point. Germany, just taking one country in Europe, Germany's federal government spent 21.7 billion, not million, billion euros in 2016 dealing with the migrant crisis. All of this information can be looked up. You don't have to take my word on anything. And as reported, and it's unclear how much true that the government has spent on migrants as a total, if you round up all of Europe or all those countries that are inflicted with the migrant crisis. But the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development recently found that Germany's budget for security, never mind the number I just gave you now, but the budget for security, maybe especially around Christmas time too, will grow by at least one third from 6.1 billion to 0.83 billion euros. So right. This raises the question, in maybe if we want to direct the conversation along the lines of if all of this is like in violation of libertarian principles, because this dangerously sounds like a violation of property rights as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, well, I'll dovetail on there, Victor. The issue here, of course, is, and this is the problem I have in throwing down with nationalists. And I'm going to say this: I have more in common with open border libertarians than I do with those border nationalists by a long shot. Because if we close the border tomorrow, we haven't struck the root yet. And this is going to be a problem in Europe. So let's say everyone closes their borders. Well, we're locked in with bloody status here. And we have to deal with the migration of Canadians through the birth canal of Canadian women who are getting indoctrinated into public school, who are asked for more things. Look, let me use France as an example. So we have this yellow vest movement. Now, at first glance, seemed great, right? They're protesting tax. Finally, the tax libertarians have been waiting for. But let me read you some of their demands. Right under lower taxes is increase immediately the minimum wage, pensions, and by 40%. The next thing is massive hiring of civil servants to restore the quality of public services. The next thing is a massive housing project. The next thing is to cancel the debt, of all things. Why would anyone lend if you're going to wipe out debt? The next thing is tackle tax evaders, tax the rich, immediately shut down a privatization, and it just ban plastics, ban GMOs and pesticides. Like the list goes on. So what we have is Western civilization is rotting from the inside out. And what you're seeing now is flies being attracted to a rotting carcass. We have a giant welfare state. So of course we're going to attract a different kind of immigrant. And Victor, you said, you know, 50, 60, 70 years ago, 100 years ago, we attracted a different type of immigrant. We didn't have this massive welfare state. We had a relatively restrained government. My great-grandparents fled Russia and came here, lived in a grain bin, planted crops in a ditch because they couldn't afford food, and they built a better life for themselves. You know, at that time, 30% of immigrants that came to Canada, that came to the free world, turned around and went home because they couldn't cut it. But now, of course, we're just hand those people handouts. So we're not losing that 30% that we need to lose. We're keeping them, and we're attracting people to this bloated carcass, like flies to a rotting carcass of a welfare state. So, and I think there was a recent study done in about Europe migration that's showing that the primary factor now isn't that people are moving for a better opportunity or fleeing war. They're going to get these state benefits. They're going to be looked after from cradle to the grave now. And this UN compact is a reaffirmation and upping the ante on that commitment. And here's the other issue I have with it. This isn't even, it isn't even that some globalists across the world are driving this thing. Our own bloody politicians are. Our immigration minister, the Somali fella that is out in front of the camera on this issue, talked about how Canada made the first concrete steps in this UN Migration Pact, how Canada will be leading the way in it. So Canada is taking a lead position here. If anything, this is Canadian imperialism. We're trying to spread Canadian Justin Trudeau virtue signaling around the world and make all the taxpayers of the world, all the productive citizens, all the people that are hacking their existence out of wilderness and making a better lives for themselves. Those are the people that are going to have to pay for these champagne socialist lifestyle and virtue signaling. Bennett, over to you.
Hey. Well, I was just thinking, I was just about ready to say, sounds like a perfect reason why we got to get rid of that big, gigantic gun in the room, doesn't it? I mean, really, not to stop the pretense that everyone has sovereign individuality as the pretense of what it is to be a free human being. But what you're saying, even when you're talking about France's demands, what that sounds like to me, and this is the same in Canada, this can be translated into any language in any country, is when you create something called government that has the capacity to redistribute the income or the wealth of anybody else, then everyone's going to clamor to using that big gigantic gun. And that's what you were suggesting in France, is not only do we want to have actual negative rights like freedoms, just to be free from stuff, is, hey, why not? Hey, look, there's a big gigantic gun in the room. It's called government. Hey, well, while we're at it, why don't we just use that to impose our wills on everyone else and say, I want free stuff too? Once again, sounds like a perfect reason to, at least if we're not ready to quite, get rid of Santa Claus, right? If we're still not mature enough to get rid of Santa Claus, at least accept that Santa Claus can only bring you one gift, okay? Right? And that gift is going to be freedom or liberty. So you either have freedom and liberty, or you can have this pretense where you get free stuff. But actually, that's not ever going to work, because that, once again, you'll find out once you reach down in that bag, something's going to bite you, and you're going to pull your hand in, it's all going to be bleeding, and you're going to bleed out eventually. So you can't have free stuff, because the minute you try to seek out free things from other people, well, what we've seen in the political process is they'll just seek to take control of that gun and point it back at you, and then they're going to want to take from you, and this is what happens back and forth, left, right, or everywhere in between. Now everyone's just, how can we use the government or the state as a means to an end? Whereas I'm saying, just like what you were saying about nationalism earlier, yep, I'm not a nationalist either. Matter of fact, I don't take pride in the nation. I take pride in things that people have been very competent. Individuals. I take pride in the people's individual accomplishment. If you achieved or accomplished something that was that proved to be successful, and you did it morally, and you're a good, compassionate, I will say that you're a good person, and I appreciate you for what you did. But it's not about the nation, but we do. That's the thing. This is me being pragmatic. Not a nationalist, but I live in a nation. It's called Canada. I didn't invent it. Other people did. So as much as I would like to think that nations shouldn't exist, I should be free from being a forced subject to some ruling class. But as it is today, the rest of my peeps in Canada, 30-some million of them, believe in the magic of government or the mysticism of government. So I got to function under that paradigm. That paradigm is to suggest to these people, okay, you want to believe in your political lord? Go ahead. But at least, just like with the real or the God of Christianity, can we at least stick to some very basic fundamental fucking rules where we don't steal from each other, we don't forcefully enslave each other socially and economically, we treat each other with respect? Can we at least get to that? At some point in time, not only am I non-nationalist, I want there to be 7 billion plus individual sovereign nations, or individuals, right? Because that's what it means to be. If you're talking about sovereign, that's the thing of those people at the United Nations. Oh, we respect the sovereignty of the state. What the fuck is the state? I wish one of these assholes, I wish I'd been sitting in that audience and said, could you please explain to me what the hell a state is? Well, it's a collection of people. Well, what's a collection of people? Individuals? Yes. Okay. So you mean the sovereignty of the individual. That's ultimately what you're trying to suggest, right? Well, if there's sovereignty of the individual, then the United Nations ceases to exist. These people that think that they can forcefully impose their ideas, their mandates, or edicts on me ceases to exist. So that already covers the nationalism. And as far as the wages, let me get to the wages thing too. I actually agree with you, Tim. Listen, I'm all for free market. But once again, using the pragmatic brain, I have to. People have forced me, right? I'm no longer mystical thinking in any way. So everyone around me have wanted to hold me to 100% perfection as far as morality. Okay, this is what you're going to get then. That means I'm going to hold you to the same fucking standard. And the point is, you cannot increase wages. Now, if we function under any kind of free market environment where our value of our labor was based on actual free market exchanges, on board, completely on board with that, right? But we all have central bankers, and these central bankers get to constantly manipulate what the value of our labor is. So if they can make the value of someone else's labor doing the exact same job, if some country gets to devalue their labor much, much more than, my country, then why the hell should I be forced to compete with them? It'd be a totally different scenario. Like I say, when we used to at least function under somewhat of a quasi-even realm, where at least it was the post-Enlightenment era Western nations, where at least we all kind of had a little bit of semblance of what it means to have, market economies, people that understood about Adam Smith and free market. Then at least, even then it was never perfect, but at least we were closely aligned. But now to try to suggest that we could compete with what the labor, and that's the thing, it's in correlation to the wages they expect in Canadian dollars or American dollars in comparison or contrast to the yuan or the renminbi or the whatever the, well, actually the euro. Well, the euro is basically, they just took the combination of 28 states, 28 countries to try to make their currency seem much more than actually it would be, because individual states, it would have never been worth that. But because they can combine the purchasing power of 28 states, they made their currency artificially higher than I think it actually is deemed worthy. But that's the thing. In a free market environment, when we're sitting here having these arguments, we have to point out, or these conversations, we have to point out to the people that are listening that all the things that we're talking about, like what Tim was saying, he's 100% right. And I am completely in agreement with that. But only if we're functioning where the measure of our value of our labor is at least in some kind of harmony. When you're talking about where it's on such massive devaluations, or where people, like I say, can work for $1 a day in some other country, come here. Like if I was a person, I just put myself in the mindset of someone that worked for $1 a day in some third world emerging country. If you come to Canada and even make $10 an hour, which is great for them, that's like, I'm fucking rich beyond rich. If you're one of those people, oh, look at this. Hey, I'm a king of all. But if you lived in Canada and you grew up under like the actual current monetary situation that we've had to, that $10 an hour, you've taken a hit that would put you or place you back to probably about, I don't know, somewhere in the early 19th century as far as your purchasing power. This is the problem, is inflation constantly keeps messing with the purchasing power and the value of our labor. So as much as I want to function where I can compete with people all around the world, well, unless their governments want to hold their citizens or hold their currency to some kind of equal standard that Western nations are on, then I can't compete. I can't. And none of us can. No Canadian, like perfect example, I'll just give one example and I'll shut up. Mexico, if you go to GM in Mexico right now, you're making $5 an hour. Well, it's in pesos, but the equivalency adjusted for, the currency valuation, equivalent to $5 an hour. You tell me one Canadian out there could go and work for $5 an hour on like even a full-time 40-hour job and be able to pay to sustain your life, right? Now, you might be able to have a home temporarily a couple of weeks if you rent a motel maybe or something on the cheap, but you're not going to be able to live very well if you live on that kind of wages. And that's the thing. That's the contrast between the valuations that we've built up. So I don't want to race down to the bottom. I would love, like I say, if we all started at the point, you know, post-Enlightenment era, if everyone around the world, all 7, or back then it wouldn't have been 7 billion, if we all started from the same starting point, I would be completely in line and on board with let's all be treated equally. But we haven't. No country around the world has been the same as every other country. There's so many variances and discrepancies that we can't function, which is why it's a sad reality, and there's going to be corrections. There's going to be hardships for a lot of people. But for the immediate term, what has to happen is you got to take your hands off the economy, folks. You got to let people just do what they have to do, because every human being on the planet, domestic populations, whether you're a national citizen or every individual is going to want to do what's best for them. And if you let that function, then I think actually at some point in time, maybe we can raise and elevate some of these people in some of these other countries. That's another thing. Why aren't we talking about raising and elevating these people in these countries so they don't have to keep coming to ours? If you're a good person, if you care about these people in these third world or emerging countries, why don't you care about their countries? Why do you think the only place that they should have to escape to is Canada or the U.S.? What the hell is wrong with them actually being productive in their own country where they can, you know, maybe force their own government, maybe protest and petition their own governments or do whatever they got to do to make sure their governments are treating them with much more respect and respecting the value of their labor and the intellect that they provide. Those people would be much better suited helping the people in their domestic countries, because that's the other thing. The minute you rip them from their countries to bring them here, is these are the people that, and even if you go by the pretense that Hussein and others suggest, oh, we're just bringing about the best of the best, the economic migrants, right? Well, that means you're robbing, you're plundering the best of the best from these countries that really, really need those fucking people. Because what you're doing is, for the rest of those people, even if you take 5%, 10%, or even a few percent of those people out of that country, what you're doing is you're basically putting the rest of those people in even more precarious situations, because you're taking the brain drain. You're draining the brains from that country to bring it here. And let me tell you, Canada, the U.S., and us Western developed countries, yeah, we'll be okay without them. It's the countries that are going through the hard times these days that really need these people. Okay, I'm done.
All right. Well, a couple things. One of the things I think we have to be careful of is this idea that stasis is an option, right? That we can get back to some golden era or something like that. This is the same kind of fallacy that climate alarmists go through, right? That they imagine that stasis is an option, that we can, if we limit human interaction or behavior, then somehow we can stop climate change or stop the climate from changing. And on the right, the equivalent of CO2 in a lot of ways is are migrants, right? That if there's a tipping point of migrants, it's going to unleash a tipping point of cultural change. Well, the problem is here that the culture is changing regardless of whether we get the migrants or whether we or not. And the economy is changing as well. It's not the $5 Mexicans you got to worry about. It's the robots. Robots are going to be free, and they're going to be in every household. You're going to be able to manufacture whatever you want. And so Canadian people who have been indoctrinated in public schools, who have learned to become slaves to the system, who've learned an employee mentality where things come from the boss and come from the corporation, are going to have to shift their mindset pretty quick, and it's going to be tumultuous. They're going to have to learn how to be employers and entrepreneurs. They're going to have to learn how to employ cheap labor like robots or Mexicans or Filipinos or whoever is available. That's a huge opportunity if you look at it from one perspective, but it's a huge change from another perspective. And it's just like climate change. It's going to suck to be on the coast, but guess what? For every acre of land that gets gobbled up by the ocean, we have 100 more acres of arable farmland that represents an opportunity because of global warming. So people have to they have to stifle this instinct they have to use the government to put a lid on this. The government cannot put a lid on this no matter how hard they try. And obviously everything they're doing right now is making the problem worse. But the problem is, and the danger is, that all the people speaking out about this are statists on both sides of the issue. They're statists. And so I guess my call would be for unity in the libertarian community, whether you're open border or closed border, is it matters less to me than if you see the root of the problem as the state and a large state. That should be the focus. If we don't strike that root, things are going to get worse, because that's the root of all evil. And things are going to change. Things are going to change rapidly, and it's going to happen. And there's nothing the government can do about that. It can only add fuel to the fire and make things worse.
Can I just say, I'll be real quick too, Tim, because I just wanted to clarify a little bit. I'm not, like I say, I'm not for closed borders, and I'm definitely not for open borders. But to me, if these corporations, like if you're a business owner and you want to, seek out alternative or cheaper labor, I'm not, like I say, I'm not necessarily against that. But if these corporations had to do that on their own fruition and their own dime, it might not work out. The bottom dollar or the bottom line might not work to be as profitable for them if they didn't have government doing all that for them. Because that's the thing, when government's doing, that's the way it's functioning today. It's the government.
Oh, absolutely. And listen, what's happening here in Alberta, we just had Notley announce, invite investors to build a refinery here in Alberta. Now, this is something the NDP's been talking about for a long time. For a while there, I thought they wanted the state to build one, but now they're inviting investors. It's not clear why investors would even come to Alberta now that we have a carbon tax and all these male construction workers that are getting demonized by the left, and massive regulation and all these other things. But I suspect Notley's going to roll out the red carpet and provide a bunch of taxpayer money to invest. Yes, we need to cut off these subsidies and let businesses survive on their own. And yeah, again, the root of the problem here is government. And if we could just get back to a limited government, then almost all these problems with immigration go away. But of course, we're a long way from that, and it shows no signs of stopping. The people that are up in arms and that are rebelling are just as big a status as the people that they're protesting against. But Victor, you've been sitting there quietly. I want to hear some comments from you.
Sure. Yeah. Well, just since you guys have been talking about open versus closed or whatnot, just for clarification of my own position, that I too. I'm just as much against closed borders as I am for open borders, and for the same reason. This is because the government's calling the shots in either case. I don't consider an open border some kind of like dogmatic, unilateral, anarchist doctrine, regardless of the circumstances, or some kind of like or anarchist virtue. Are you for closed borders? No, I'm for closed borders. Or you're a statist. I'm for open borders. Oh, you're an anarchist. Like, this is ridiculous. This is the government is calling the shots, and there's a lot of people who insist that you have to be slotted into one of those two categories, open or closed border. Somebody might very well say, well, how about that European in the turn of the century who's he's got some skills. He's a hard worker. He wants a better life. Are you going to impede his progress to move to go to the United States and to set up tent and start life anew there? No. Like, are you going to freedom of movement? Are you going to impede that? No. Why would I? Oh, so you're for open borders? No, I'm not. It's a separate thing altogether. Open borders now also entails what the world is facing at current here at Europe. The context is different. It's an entirely different scenario. Now it sucks. Now we don't have the spontaneous movement of people. What we have is an orchestrated, manipulated, controlled mass horror show of moving people about the world like just so many chess pieces on a board. All controlled by the puppeteers, all controlled, manipulating this, and come to this country welfare shop here, and re-educating the populations. Oh, it's Western imperialism that's caused all of this, and you're a Nazi if you have any doubts about this whatsoever. So let me state from the outset, if people are confused of am I listening to libertarians? Am I listening to anarchists? Or who are these people? Tim, Bennett, and myself. Let me just say from the outset, I am an anarchist in the more flowered meaning of the term, and not the pop culture Johnny Rotten.
Okay, well let's go with that for a second, Victor, and I'll ask both you and Bennett this, since you both kind of talked about statelessness and getting rid of government. How would migration work without the state? In other words, you know, I suspect in the type of world you're talking about, anarcho-capitalist, everything's privately owned, right? The streets are privately owned, the infrastructure is privately owned, the crown land is now owned by landowners. Seems to me that migration would be somewhat limited in that type of environment. Wouldn't you need permission to step off your property, since as soon as you step off your property, what you're stepping on is owned by something else, more than likely? So where is it that these anarchists think that you can just travel wherever you want in a privatized world? Wouldn't that require, I mean, I suspect obviously business would want traffic to them. Cities, generally free flow movement would be something that the market would prefer, since that's how commerce occurs and that's how people get rich and flourish. And so it would probably be very easy for virtuous people to move around all over the world, but very difficult for non-virtuous people. Am I getting it right? Or you guys maybe can make some comments about how people would move in that type of environment.
No, I'm glad that you asked that. Okay, yeah, it is true. Yeah, I'm an advocate for free markets and private property. I go with the Walter Block dictum of if it doesn't move, privatize it. If it does move, privatize it. Since everything either moves or doesn't move, privatize everything. In a free society, borders, if we're to use that term, are determined and enforced by private property owners instead of a relatively small cadre of people calling themselves government. In a free society, immigration, quote unquote, only happens according to private property norms. An open border won't save you. It's okay. A border, when we use that term, we have to, in the current lexicon of usage, it refers to the state. Why the hell would anarchists be advocating at all open borders if we understand that to be a state artifact? In an anarchist capitalist society, there is no government, and accordingly, no clear-cut distinction between domestic citizens and foreigners.
Well, Victor, sorry to interrupt, but in fairness to the people that are open borders, most of the arguments I've heard is that they just don't want the government doing anything, including stopping people from moving to from point A to point B across these imaginary state lines. So aren't they just taking that position? Maybe they don't understand the pragmatic ramifications of that, but aren't they just saying, to hell with pragmatism, I'm sticking with principle, and I just don't want the government doing anything, including mounting border guards, building walls, and stopping people from traveling from A to B?
Yeah, no, they're not operating from principle. Look, you can have status, whatever their political stripe is, conservative or liberal or whatever. It's a statist argument. You'll have status who will argue for open borders, and you will have status who argue for closed borders, and it's properly a statist argument. Now, it is true, and it seems like you brought me a full swing around to bring up Larkin Rose anyway in regards to that question, because of a lot of his minions follow along on this lines of of an open border as a unilateral anarchist doctrine, for Christ's sakes, a state border as an anarchist doctrine. Pardon me while I laugh for a moment there. Okay, I'm back.
Not an argument.
Yeah, it's not an argument. Yeah, no. In the law, I just to give kudos where it properly belongs. I do believe that Larkin Rose is sincere in his advocacy of a stateless society. That's ultimately all of our goals, or all of our projections, or all of our pontificating and shouting and making ourselves outspoken advocates of a free society. And we're out there in the thick of it. We're stepping up to the plate. That's what we're all calling for. That's what we're all propelled towards. But in the and as is Larkin Rose. But in the meantime, though, in the meantime, to set up the whole idea of an open border as like a small crack in the door, as a lean towards freedom, to that freedom that we all want, as an example of it, at least a crumb from the king's table, open border. It's not that at all, because if you have certain status or power elites, whether the UN or of the domestic countries, who have an agenda behind that open border, then you've thrown, there's no longer a principle involved. There's no longer a principle involved. In fact, I asked one anarchist, it's like, look, if the UN made demands that that Israel was to open their borders tomorrow, would you call for it? Yeah, because I'm principled. Yes, it's like, what? Right. What? You see the insanity of this position? Now, you could derive a lot of benefits from what open borders could bring. Back to the turn of the century, traveling from Europe, people just no welfare state, no hate speech laws, no this, that, everything else. It's compounded to accommodate open borders according to the statist agenda, by the way, with all these other laws that came into the fore, re-educating the media, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, no, but there's good things that can come from open borders, regardless of the state, and there's bad things that can come from it. There's good things that can come from a closed border, vetted individuals who are going to go to that closed-in, roped category of what becomes, in effect, your living room. Your country becomes your living room, and now anybody can just trot in, and not just from the power elite that's hovering us above us, called the Canadian government. Now it's being dictated by the UN, and this is an anarchist celebration. Right. Calling for these open borders.
I hear. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm just hearing myself in the background. But let me tell you how my thinking has changed on this, because I was fairly open borders in the past, and the way I think about it now is, look, if it comes back a little bit to recognizing the reality of the situation, right? So hospitals in Alberta and in Canada are publicly owned. All right, the government owns and operates them. Now, an anarchist could say, well, the government has no right to kick you out of the hospital, has no right to bar you from the hospital, has no right to this, no right to that. But listen, we need to have security at the hospital. There needs to be rules in the hospital. We can't have everyone in the hospital at the same time. You can't have 10,000 people flood the hospital. There has to be some rules there. And so essentially, to me, the anarchist position ought to be, let's privatize the hospital so we can get a proper rule set in that hospital, not let's abolish the rules of the hospital. It's the same with roads. The argument isn't that speed limits are bad or that we should have no rules on the road whatsoever. It should be that the government shouldn't own roads, because right now, and so in the absence of a market that can provide us with competing rule sets for these institutions and these roads and this infrastructure, we can't just abolish the rules while we have the government owning these things, right? And so the government owns a lot of crown land, owns a lot of infrastructure. Should we have no littering? Should we be allowed to litter on government-owned property? Should we be allowed to log however many trees we want? Obviously we have to have some rules in the commons, and immigration is another one of these things that it has consequences in a statist society. And so if we're going to work towards a limited government, or even towards what you, Bennett and Victor, are looking for, a totally voluntary society, which is a noble goal, it probably matters the order in how we get there. It probably matters how we get there a little bit. And so this is why in the last election, for example, I had an immigration policy that called for basically a market-based approach to immigration. I said, we're going to close the borders basically, but any Canadian citizen can sponsor and invite whoever they want to Canada, provided they backstop that person financially, and provided they take on some liability if that person goes off the rails criminally. And so that either they have to pay for the legal fees, or they bear some kind of criminal liability to the people that. So to me, because the thing I couldn't wrap my head around was, you know, the liberals saying, well, we want 350,000 people, and the conservatives saying, well, we only want 250,000 people. I'm like, where are they getting these arbitrary numbers from? How do they know what the right amount of immigration is? And so I thought that this type of market-based solution would be the best way. That way, liberals could put their money where their heart is, and they could be as compassionate as they want and invite all the third world immigrants to their house they want and pay for them. But I suspect they probably wouldn't, because it's mostly virtue signaling. And I think we'd get better vetting that way too, because if you're going to be on the hook liability-wise for the people you bring over, then you're going to make sure that those people are going to integrate well into Canadian society. So that was my thinking and evolution on immigration. But Bennett, maybe I'll get your comments on it and what your thoughts are.
Tim, you took the words right out of my mouth. I'll probably say it in a little different way, but I just want to function under, whether it's in my immediate environment, you know, in the state, or on the world stage. I just want to function under a rules-based setting where it's propagated universally, where nobody gets exceptions to the rules. So if we're going to create rules, right, then let's all live and abide by the rules. The problem that I've always found time and time again is there's always an area, which is those who represent the state, where they get to function in an area where they don't have to align by the rules and they put forth and present towards us. That reminds me, even when I was growing up, I don't know if you remember, like as a young man, but I won't even say if it was my own personal experience or a friend's experience, but it, you know, let's say you see your kid get into a fight with someone in the school, right? And they're punching each other out. And the parent comes along, grabs one of the kids and starts smacking them silly and said, "You're not to ever hit someone. Did I not ever tell you you're not supposed to hit someone?" While they're smacking the living shit out of their kid. All I'm saying is, like I say, just like in your family, consider society as just an extended part of your family, because that's basically how the state is trying to put forth and present. That's the whole point, is we're all one big family, right? So then if we're all one big fucking family, then we should all have to function under the same goddamn rules. So if I'm not allowed to steal from someone, right, which I'm not, I know that. Matter of fact, I stay completely confined within those paradigms because I realize it's a bad thing. I don't even do it because the government tells me it's bad. I do it because, matter of fact, I care about myself today, tomorrow, next week. Stealing is not a good strategy for your long-term livelihood, to be honest with you. But like I say, I just want to function in the rules, just like if I was going to sit down and play a board game with someone. If some asshole, if I was sitting down playing Monopoly or the game of life, and some asshole could just write little cards and, oh, look, I get a jail-free card every time I roll the dice. I'm not going to fucking play in that game. Why the hell would I want to play in that game? This guy gets to constantly manipulate the game constantly, and I got to go to jail all the time, right? No. All I've ever said my whole life, and I think that's what most of us really, let's get down to the brass tacks, folks. That's really, I think, what most anarchists or libertarians, critical thinkers, independents, anyone that's got a fucking objective brain on their head, I think all we're saying is let's function under something that's at least consistent when you're talking about the rules. Government is the pretense that some people get to escape those rules and the rest of us have to abide by them. That's all I'm saying. So I recognize that there's a government candidate. Sometimes it's called liberal, sometimes called conservative, sometimes they call them NDP. Fortunately, the NDP, very few fucking times they get, because like that's pure socialism in this country. And like I say, as much as I recognize Canadians like to play that middle ground, they like having both of it. They like capitalism, but they also like to have that little bit of theft when they need it, right? So, but at least Canadians have never been foolish enough that we want to go full socialism, because they realize if we go full socialism, there's not going to be anyone to steal from anymore. So no, never go that way. So even the fucking Canadians, even though they don't think about this in this way, I don't think Canadians would ever go on to full totalitarian socialism, but we're creeping to the point where we're under this auspices of the pretense that we're also benevolent because of these social safety nets. But those social safety nets now, the world that we live in today, we're all living on, and even my parents or grandparents, every time they're going to the doctors, look at the fucking debts, folks. They're at levels that it's going to take 20, 30, 40, 50. Most of the people that are going to the doctors today are never going to be on the hook for paying for all those expenses. It's going to be passed on to successive generations. I would never want to seek to impose anything on my children. That was the golden rule, and most humans in Western societies post-enlightenment era realized let's not pass on debt obligations to our children, and that's what the state's represented, and whether they do it domestically or whether they do it by using the state to bring in other people. Because like I say, I cannot know everything. Victor can't know everything. Tim, none of us can know everything about how economy works. That was the understanding of the invisible hand. So I would never suggest that I should know. I don't know how to manipulate the board game, right? Nor should anyone. There shouldn't be a politician out there today, but look at them. They all that think that they got the best plan. They got the best way to do it. No, I'm saying let freedom flourish. And what we've mostly recognized is as long as we function under some kind of a rules-based society, which is what post-Enlightenment era values were supposed to represent, right? Very, very, very simple rules. Don't hit, don't steal. We all know this. We all know this. If we just function under those very baseline of rules, and no one's going to be perfect, but at least if we hold to at least some standard, some standard, that is why do you think Western societies is where everyone wants to congregate to today? The reason why they all want to come here, the reason why we're all not rushing to Africa or Asia or the Middle East is because we were the ones that went through the Reformation. We were the ones in Western, not me particularly. So once again, I'm giving credit, but there are people that did these, people that did have a lot of influence and sway historically, whether it's through the rhetoric, whether it's through their books, or whether it isn't through the political. But actually, political processes and authoritarianism actually doesn't change and affect the human psychology. Giving people good, logical reason and understanding that's built and entrenched on morality. That's what usually gets people adopted these kind of things. But the historical precedent, Western society looks like today, we're trying to reject all the beautiful things that people in the past that have built up and understood. Rather than us build upon them and make it even better, it seems that we're going to, when you talk about retracting or regressing, that's the central planners seem to want to regress us back to the point where there's no rules anymore. That's what central banks are doing. They're picking winners or losers in the economy and the government because they realize that, well, hey, if we can just prop up some segment of the economy by throwing money at the situation, it looks like we're coming across benevolent. But what we're seeing today, that's not functioning. We, like I say, let's just get back to that's what the founding fathers, when they put forth the Constitution, was based on genuine rules that were objective and universally consistent. If you can do that as best you can, not saying they did it perfect, but we should build and expand upon that, but just create some very basic ground rules, and it shouldn't be that many. You don't need thousands of laws. You just need a very minimal basis of ground rules and hold people to account and make sure that they're held to account and responsible for their actions. As long as you do that, just like with your kid, you can keep handing your kids money time and time again every time they need it or require it, but you're never going to create a child that's going to be independent, have self-esteem, and be willing to take on and assume the task, role, and responsibility of taking care of themselves. That's what society is. Society is just, like I say, it's just basically like the pretense of an extended family. And just like when you're raising your family, you want the best thing you can do for your family, your offspring, is to give them proper guidance, give them some good moral foundations and ground rules, and let them go out there on the world and do as best they can. And most of the times they will function great, and they'll actually, we've seen the people that do have created all the things that we get to enjoy today. It's just like I say, it just always comes back to just being reasonable. But I wanted to cover one other thing, and then I'll shut up, because Tim was talking about the robots. I've thought about this too. The robot side of things, I agree with you there. But why do you think robots have become so prominent in our lives? It's because the current market, the people that function under the current market environment, realize that there is a certain a pool of citizens in Western societies that you have to drive or draw from for your productive capacity. And because they recognize, because the baby boomers and Gen X and millennials, there's a glaring divide there in how many the offspring that was produced. Well, that's why they went to the robotics and stuff, because they realized that there's a shrinking. But now that they're functioning actually under somewhat kind of market forces, now you're saying, let's bring in now the central planner is saying, bring in millions of illegal or even illegal migrants. Well, these companies that have pivoted towards these robotic models as a means to supplant or make up for the decline in the labor participation rate. Well, if you introduce a whole bunch of extra laborers when these companies are going to the robotics model, they're not all of a sudden going to turn away from technology. You're actually making that problem even worse. If you bring millions and millions of people into a country and these companies are leaning towards, because they recognize that, robots actually, they can produce a lot more. That's just a reality, folks. They can produce a whole lot more. They don't grunt and groan, right? They don't need breaks. a little bit of downtime for service and repairs maybe, but like I say, they've functioned in the environment where that's where they're headed. That's their business model. And now the government is trying to bring in workers. Like I say, the market will take care of it, no matter if there's an excess or, you know, a minimal amount of labor and they need more. Companies will always find a way to get around that. Well, the innovative ones, the creative ones, the ones that are using proper market forces, they'll get around and circumvent any impositions that are placed upon them, whether it's even through government imposed mandates or not, or just technological advancements. But that's where, like I say, you just have to let that invisible. Everybody will, like, people are scared. That's the thing. It's like, it's so funny. It's like such a religious thing. Oh, we need somebody to control the levers. No, Adam Smith. And like I say, if you understand Adam Smith and what he talked about, and he was a moral guy, he was a religious, it's not like this guy was just, ooh, yeah, let's just let business go run wild. No, he understood the morality of what it is to have economic transactions between human beings. And he realized every other example you could possibly think of. And even 200 years later, we can see that he was absolutely correct. There's no other way that market interveners or interventionists can manipulate the economy enough to override everything that's going to affect the decisions of millions or ultimately billions of people. Just let the market play out, like I say, but make sure it's based on fundamental ground rules, and you'll see that it'll work out fine. There'll be, there'll be some transitional points, but that's okay. It'll be fine, people. Don't be scared of the market. Don't be scared of people. People are all right.
And don't be scared of robots. Robots are our
friends.
Don't
be scared of robots.
Yeah. I guess for low skill, inarticulate, even in their own language, migrants are not going to bode too well in a automized, highly industrial, scientific society, right? So,
well, someone's going to need to clean the robots, Victor, and it's not going to be me. I'm going to be the guy employing them. So,
yeah, you might have to change those bearings once in a while,
another thing too, like in regards to the just to backtrack a little bit. It's curious to ask the question. The reason why socialists and globalists, for that matter, are so violently for open borders is because they are fundamentally opposed to property rights. Open state borders are greatly increased the demand for more programs as well. You were talking about Western values there, the philosophical achievements of the West, Bennett.
Yep.
And by extension, like as I say, the open state borders will increase the demand for more programs, and by extension, the state's power. So now we have like an erosion of free speech, which is a cornerstone of Western civilization's free speech, or at least in the American model. The negative effect of such a policy are further compounded when anti-discrimination laws, hate speech laws serve. So we can even see you were touting the virtues of Western civilization. Now those virtues, in accordance to accommodating an open border policy, has ushered in these other erosions into other areas. And this is why I think, to use an Ayn Rand phrase, I don't know if you ever heard this phrase, but concrete bound mentality. Have you ever heard of that? It's a beautiful designation by Ayn Rand. Have you ever heard anything like
concrete, what was it, Victor?
Concrete bound mentality.
I don't think I have, actually. And I usually know quite a bit about Ayn Rand because I've read her books and I listen to a lot of anything has to do with Ayn Rand I usually listen to, but no.
Well, I've studied her for 30 years, so I guess I can consider myself an expert on her philosophy. But anyway, nice. But I accuse the open-bordered anarchists, or the statists for that matter, of being like concrete bound, because all they can see, they can't see the forest because they have their face pressed up, not against a bark of wood on a tree. All they see is that open border, unimpeded freedom of movement. Oh, that's freedom. Well, freedom of movement. A socialist can get behind that. Well, what is that anyway? And freedom of movement does not trump property rights. Does not trump property rights. This freedom of movement, whatever that is, this nebulous bullshit term, freedom of movement. You know, there's property rights. That's it. Individual rights and property rights. That is the cornerstone of the libertarian philosophy, and that's being violated in spades, all as a crossover relevance to open borders, these erosions into other freedoms, freedom of speech, etc.
Go for it, Tim.
Well said, Victor. Yeah, I think that you know, one thing where we all libertarians can find common ground is that we want to strengthen property rights, strengthen those borders of the property line, and deport government from private property once and for all. I think we've pretty much beaten this UN compact to death. I think we can all agree it's not a good thing. It's a bad thing. It's a step in the wrong direction. Is there anything else you guys want to add before we sign off?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to add right now, just as some anecdotal experience that we already have, because I've already seen this report, and I covered in a past subsequent video, but this was even reported by our state media broadcaster, so you know it's going to be true. I know I'm laughing, but no, but seriously though, they actually even had to cover this as well. But 60%, so we had this mass influx of these illegal immigrants that have been flown across the border. Not even in relation to the 300,000+ that are the legal migrants coming to this country, but those I'm talking about just in reference to the illegal asylum seekers. But we've seen, I think it's upwards of 40,000-ish. Well, the figures are anywhere between 25 and 40,000. Who knows? What, somewhere in and around there, but roughly in around that 25 to 40,000 category. But 2 years, or was it, no, 1 year after, even since they've been here in this country and they've gone through the entire process, 60% of those who've already come here are still relying on social assistance, which tells you that it's not like there's this massive amount of job opportunities. Well, I mean, it depends. It's because there's not a one size fits all. So when you're talking about jobs like that, that's, once again, that's an open statement. What does job, that could mean so many different areas of the economy. Who's to say these people that are coming here illegally have the skills that are necessary? Because it's not like the legal migration process where they or is at least some pretense where they're trying to fill a void in certain particular segments of the economy. But as far as the illegals, these are people who just flown across the border because they're scared of Trump, or they just want to, you know, I guess, as some people suggest, the welfare shopping, because Canada has a pretty decent welfare state, just like some of the Western Europeans, although the U.S. has a pretty decent one. But Canada does Canada definitely has a much larger social safety net, I believe, than the U.S., at least to a certain degree. So they're basically, what's happening is they're coming here, and we've seen, so if 60% of them, even after they've been here a year, aren't still like out there, you know, being providers or working in society or providing anything to society, then these are people that, and I'm not blaming them. That's the thing. I want to point this out first and foremost. I do not blame people that want to come in. If I walk down Queen Street, I live in the, you know, the Toronto area. If I walk downtown Queen Street with my wallet hanging out and there's like $1,000 bills or $100, if someone comes up and rob me, I mean, they're a bad person, I guess you could say, because they realize that they're doing something that's illegal. But hello, I'm a fucking idiot for leaving my wallet hanging out. But the fact that Trudeau came out there and basically said with his tweet that just come on, anyone you want, and they decided, well, hey, let's take him up on his offer. I'm not necessarily placing the blame on the people that looking at, oh, look, there's economic opportunities. Who among us wouldn't want to go towards where there's economic opportunities? Like I say, I don't have a hatred on for the people that want to come. What I have a problem with is the fact that the central planners trying to use their benevolence, like, oh, look at how, like Trudeau's out there, oh, look at how kind I am. Oh, what the fuck, Trudeau? Are you paying for all these people? You're not paying a dime, you piece of shit. So why the fuck are you out there on the stage acting like you're doing some great thing when what you're doing is you're forcing me and Victor and Tim and everyone else to pick up and pony to pay for these people, and some of them I may very well deem worthy of it. But can't we leave that voluntarily? Can't we rely on charity? Since Trudeau and all these suggest that Canada, we're so accepting. That's the thing. They're out there constantly talking about how Canada, we're us as a people, we're so accepting, we're so benevolent, we're such a well, then can't you leave us amazing Canadians? Can't you leave it to our own fruition to figure out who's best or who's deemed worthy. No. Now, even though we're supposed to be such great people, no, Trudeau can't trust you to pick, like Tim was saying earlier. No, Trudeau can't allow you to sponsor your own person, right? No. We're going to deem who's going to come here, and you'll just have to suck it up whether you like it or not. That's the thing. That's not benevolence. What Tim was suggesting, that's benevolence. If you want to personally sponsor someone from a country that's a foreign country, and like they have, then there are people that have gone through a lot of shit. And I'll even mention right now that a lot of these people that are coming here, even the Syrians, it's a direct consequence as a result of some of these authoritarian pieces of shit in Canadian government or American government that bomb the fuck out of their countries. So, like I said, I don't have anything towards the Syrian people or any of these people that want to migrate because some foreign interventionist policies from, once again, these central planners from even Western countries. I always place the blame at the feet of the people that are truly. This is once again the reason why we have to get back to understand what individualism is all about. If we talk about things from the individual perspective, then we can truly point out to who the fucking culprits are that are causing the pain for whether it's those migrants, the illegals or legal, or all of us in our domestic population. We can point to the people that are truly the culprits that are causing pain for all of us. Stop using collective terms. That's the thing with collectivism. When you use these overarching collective terms, it's this pretense that we're all, like I say, I don't agree with every Canadian, and that's another thing. A lot of Canadians that share my very fucking same skin color, I have more, I loathe these people more than I do some people with skin colors completely different on my own. Because it's not, like I say, it's not about your skin color, it's not about your race, it's not about your sex, it's not about your gender, although to me it should be the same thing. It's about what the fuck's going on in your head. Are you a good, decent, moral person? That's all that matters to me. And Trudeau has shown to me that he wants to put on the pretense of benevolence, but once again, that's not benevolence. When you, at least when I went to church, at least the collection plate, when they handed it around in the church, that was voluntary. You know, maybe someone in your community that would say, how dare you not put money in it? But no, you weren't put in prison. You weren't given a fine, or you weren't deemed to be unworthy as a citizen if you couldn't afford to pony up to the collection plate, or if you didn't. Today, like I say, the central planners have placed us in this position that if you don't get in line with whatever edicts they seem determined or put forth as moral, then you're a terrible person. And like I say, if anyone that ever knew me, well, the people that do know me, which is why the people that know me follow my stuff and they understand who I am as a person, I'm a moral and decent person. I'm compassionate to anyone. I have no, like I say, I don't have any hatred. I don't loathe any people just for the fact of who they are. But if you're doing things immorally, if you're trying to use force, preemptive force, or subjugation of my fellow peeps, like I say, it doesn't matter if you're Canadian, American, or whoever you are around the world. If you're being forced to subsidize other people's livelihoods against your will, without your express permission, then the people that are imposing that on you, they're immoral. No matter how many times they stand on the pulpit or on the stage to suggest that they're doing it for the betterment of mankind. No, let the real people that care about others, those of us in the free market that don't have a pretense of authority over others, will take care of the situation and leave these central plan authoritarians at the back of the bus where they fucking rightfully belong.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, and it's been expanded now from Paul having to pay Peter. Now it's Paul and Peter having to pay Muhammad. And it has nothing to do with Muhammad's skin color. Has nothing to do with that. It's just that Paul and Peter have to pay Muhammad. That's the issue. So open borders, open state borders, as it is now, is the most critical way globalists and socialists, communists utilize to destroy property rights by using population displacement to flood the Western countries. Notice how it's just the Western countries. With people that have no allegiance to Western values and who will be sitting on the welfare state. Now, I'm glad that we've had this conversation just the day after that Soy Boy has signed a migration pact, because now we have this as a recorded public document, and now we can see what's going to yield here on in as the years roll along, and we're going to see what's going to happen, and people can refer back to this program.
All right, well said, guys. Well, thank you, audience, for tuning in, and thank you, Victor and Bennett, for coming on and talking about this. And here's a little song I'll play you out with.
Totally sucks, you motherfucker. The government totally sucks. Ben Franklin was a rebel indeed. He liked to get naked while he smoked on the weed. He was a genius, but if he was here today, the government would fuck him up his right GSA. Now let me tell you something about the government.
All right, guys. Peace out. We'll talk.
All right, have a good one, Tim. Have a good one, Victor.
See you, Bennett. Tim.
Thanks for the great conversation.
All right.
We'll have to do this again.
Will do.
The government totally sucks, you motherfucker. The government totally sucks.